morning. Welcome to Grand Rounds, first Grand Rounds of the year.
I will push to turn this on. Now it's on. Good morning. Welcome to the first Grand Rounds of the year. Just a few logistics, there are handouts and evaluations over on that end. If you can please grab a handout, please also sign in. That is for the raffle. We are really excited to give away another copy of Creative Care and more information about a book club coming related to that. So in terms of our announcements, before Samantha introduces our speaker, next Grand Rounds is 2 weeks, January 18th. Dr. Carrie Moreau will be our presenter, digital medicine as an adjunct treatment for improving sleep and cardiovascular health in older adults with PTSD. I'm looking forward to that. This month, we do not have Journal Club. Assistant and associate instructors and assistant professors will have career development times in our specific Journal Club time. And again, please do complete your evaluation. For those on Zoom, we will put that information into the Zoom. Also, afterwards, you will receive a link that includes a recording of today's Grand Rounds if you'd like to refer back. Please submit questions through the Q&A, and also we'll have a really interactive discussion for those of us here in person.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Marti Schulte, who I have been able to work with over the last year or 2 years, several years at this point. And I'm thrilled that she's here today. So Dr. Marti Schulte created Community Physicians Consulting in 2014 while practicing primary care internal medicine. Through CPC, Marti coaches individuals and organizations on issues of burnout, work engagement, and personal and professional fulfillment. Her focuses are on creating healthy work environments and helping individuals thrive in their personal and professional lives. She works with organizations to enhance the workplace culture, and she works with professionals in all phases of development and transitions. Through more than 30 years of experience in primary care internal medicine, Marti has worked with underserved urban populations, including persons who are homeless and persons with HIV. Marti is coaching certified through Case Western Reserve University, Weatherhead School of Management, and is a board certified coach. She did her medical school training at the University of Kentucky and her internal medicine residency at the University of Colorado. And as I said, she has been an amazing consultant with the WellDom Committee, and I've had the great pleasure of working with her many times. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Samantha, for that. And thank you all for inviting me for today. I'm going to assume that it was very intentional on the people who planned the Grand Rounds part, that the first Grand Rounds of 2024 is about wellness. Is that true, Samantha? It was very intentional? Well, whether it was intentional or not, I am thrilled that the first talk of the year is about well-being in the workplace. So thank you for having me. It's really also nice to see some familiar and friendly faces as I look out among your group. So here's the path we're going to take today as we talk about wellness. First, we're going to really talk a little bit about how the conversation has evolved around wellness, why it's so important, and what we actually mean by the term wellness or well-being. Then we're going to spend most of our time really talking about workplace culture. What's it look like? What are the components of it? Why it's so important to wellness. And then I'm going to end with a single suggestion of an idea for personal wellness that one might think about as this new year is beginning. So that's the path we're going to take. We really can't start by talking about wellness because that really is a fairly new term in the world of thinking about healthcare professionals and workers. We've only really started using the term wellness in the last 5, 10, maybe 15 years, but really in the last 10 years. Why do we talk about wellness? Well, we talk about wellness because there's so much occupational distress. And the term wellness has really grown from learning, understanding, and moving forward in the idea of the occupational distress that so many people who work in healing professions like healthcare experience. We use a lot of different terms for it: fatigue, problems with work-life balance, job-related stress, compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is used a lot when talking about nurses and nurses' distress. That term has been coined. It's considered a misnomer. It isn't by the psychologists and psychiatrists. Compassion doesn't cause fatigue. It is the act of providing compassion on a repeated basis, coupled with a sense of helplessness about what one can do. It isn't the act of being compassionate that creates fatigue. It's a sense of, and to what end is this serving? Then there's also the term moral injury. Many of you have probably heard that. It's gotten very popular over the last 7 or 8 years. And moral injury means that damage to one's sense of moral compass that happens when we either participate in, or we watch, or we can't participate in something that's important to our own moral compass. For example, I think this patient needs X, and I'm told I can't provide it because their insurance doesn't cover it. That is unfortunately somewhat common experience of a situation where someone might experience moral injury. And of course, the most common term that most of us have heard related to occupational distress is burnout. And I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout here. But the overall idea of occupational distress is that all of these things are not personal failings, personal shortcomings. They are a result of the workplace environment. And we know from lots of data that people who go into healthcare are not people more prone to this. In fact, many of them have more reserve and more resilience, and that this is a phenomenon related to the workplace and the stresses of the workplace. I want to give a couple disclaimers or a couple comments before I go further. One is the slides will be available, which Hillary has already said. 2 is there's a 2-page thing I'm going to refer to that those of you here have on paper, and those of you on Zoom have electronically. And the 3rd is I want to give a little bit of disclaimer as I go along, because a lot of the data I'm going to cite has been done in physicians. And over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot more research done for all the other healthcare workers and healthcare professionals. There's a lot of data now for nursing professionals, and we're seeing a growing body of data around all of these for advanced practice practitioners, even medical assistants and other healthcare workers. But the bulk of the data is physician-driven. So forgive me in advance that a lot of what I'm going to cite is physician. The good or bad news is that as we're getting more data from other people who are part of the healthcare environment besides physicians, the data seems to reinforce the same thing. And so I won't say that everything that's true of physicians is true of everybody else, but there's certainly an overlap. Okay, so what's burnout? Okay. Well, burnout is a syndrome that has been described, that was first described. Okay, wake up. Does anybody know how to get it to advance? Let's see what we can do. Here we go. Let me try that. There we go. So burnout is a syndrome that was first described about 50 years ago by 2 psychologists, Freudenberger and Christina Maslach. And it is a now well-defined syndrome that is workplace related, not individual related. Individuals experience it, but it happens as a result of the workplace. It's characterized by 3 things: emotional exhaustion, a sense of depersonalization, which is disconnection from those that one serves. We can call it cynicism. Some people call it getting a little bit crispy. But it's that perhaps annoyance and disconnect from patients that can happen. And then the 3rd feature of burnout is a decreased sense of personal satisfaction. And I hear this in the one-on-one coaching I do is, I'm not deriving any meaning. Everything I'm doing is for nothing. And, you know, in healthcare, we're in a pretty meaningful endeavor by and large. And when people say nothing I'm doing is making any difference, that's a pretty big red flag. So why does it matter about burnout? Well, it matters about burnout because the consequences of it are huge. And this is a summary slide from Dr. Tate Shanafeld, who's a national and international expert in burnout and the chief wellness officer at Stanford. It's a composite slide, but over the last 20 years, a lot of research has been done to look at the consequences of burnout for the individual and now more and more for organizations. And what we find is that there's a tremendous amount of personal and professional repercussions when a person is experiencing burnout in their work environment. The professional studies, on the professional side, we see that there's decreased in quality of care, there's more likelihood of medical errors, there's a decrease in patient satisfaction. There's also a decrease in performance and what they call professional effort, which means likely to decrease one's FTE. So yes, I'm working 0.9, but I'm going to 0.6 because it's the only way I think I can survive. And then finally, turnover. And we're seeing turnover not just in physicians, but it's a consequence, and other studies have shown it across the board. And that really has gotten the interest of people higher up in the organization because of the economic implications of that. And on a personal level, people experiencing burnout experience more challenge in relationships, more likelihood of substance abuse, and more increased incidence of depression and even suicide. And so what's happened over the last 10 years or 15 years is this sense of this is affecting so many people, and the consequences for them personally and for healthcare delivery is huge. This is a nice walk through how we've thought about occupational distress and now wellness over time. This is a nice summary article from 2021, and Dr. Shanafeld actually gave this talk to the International Conference on Physician Health in 2021, where he really gave an overview of sort of how we used to think about distress, where we are now, and where at least he envisions, and we hope some organizations are going. So it's a really nice summary. The first is the era of distress on the left, which is pre-2005. And that was really, we could also call it the era of ignorance, right? Where there was patients, it's all about the patients and the organizations, and you come to work and you do your job. And there was kind of a lack of interest or investigation or knowledge about its impact on the people doing the work. And there was really this sort of almost neglect of it. Like you came to work, you did your thing. If you had an issue, it was your issue. And over in the first 20 years of this century, there was research prior to that, but there's just this growing body of data over the last 20 years, which I think brought us into Wellbeing 1.0, which is really from about 2005 to the present, or maybe a few years ago. And this has been this blossoming of information, really a period of us learning more, of becoming more aware, of starting to say, wow, this really is having an impact. And there's a lot of distress, and we need to treat that distress. We need to treat these individuals. And at times almost saying we want to treat you, but also it's your problem. It's an individual phenomenon. And part of the way we're going to treat you is we're going to suggest you go to mindfulness classes or to yoga classes. And so the sense was, yeah, that's nice of you to offer it, but it's all up to me to do something about this, that there's somehow something wrong with me, that this has happened. And really what we're moving toward now, and some organizations are embracing it more than others, obviously, I would say we're early in the movement into well-being, which is instead of just treating distress, let's take action and try to create environments where we prevent the distress. We're still going to need to treat. I mean, that's absolutely true. And can we be more proactive? Can we look at work environments, and can we try to create structures and places where there's less distress? And even more than less distress, let's move to wellness. Let's move to a place where people actually can thrive, feel fulfilled, even the interesting phenomenon of feeling some balance or integration in their life. So the action now is we're all responsible for this. This is a workplace phenomenon. Organizations are responsible. Even the healthcare field in general is responsible. The AMA has taken a big lead in talking about this nationally. So, burnout, we have a really clear definition of. What about wellness? So we're in the era of wellness now. What do we mean by it? Well, it turns out everybody has their own definition. And Stanford uses professional fulfillment because they've also developed a professional fulfillment assessment that they market. Other places use wellness, others use satisfaction. And so we see this wide range with no clear definition. In 2005, early on, Dr. Shanafeld said, well-being goes beyond the absence of distress. And this was kind of a revolutionary idea in 2005, that we weren't just relieving distress, but we were actually trying to create places where there was challenge and thriving and a sense of achieving success. And I like this. I like everything as simple as possible. So I like this more simplified version of what wellness is, which is an overall sense of satisfaction and balance in one's life, which includes one's work life. So how do we get there? That's a pretty big picture. How do we create a space of well-being for individuals and for organizations? And this is a really nice model that's been used nationally for about the last 7 or 8 years that says there's a lot of pieces to having professional fulfillment. And at this, I'm going to make a little side here. At this point, I'm going to interchange the words professional fulfillment, well-being, and wellness, partially because we have no real definition for them, and because there aren't any diagrams that use wellness in the center. So we're going to use a diagram that says professional fulfillment in the center. But the point here is that's a pretty big task. We say, okay, I want to increase wellness in my division. Where do I even begin? And this framework can be very nice to think about. What are the big buckets of what it takes for us to think about wellness or professional fulfillment for us as a group and individually? And the 3 big buckets are the efficiency of practice or of your work setting, be that research or other, the culture that you work in, and then what you personally do for yourself and what you bring to the organization. I'm not going to focus on efficiency of practice. That's a whole other section of it. But that's the section that's about the logistics of your day-to-day life. What's the patient flow like? Is there enough staffing? What's the EHR like? How full is my inbox? What's being done to manage inboxes better, especially when I'm gone? And those are the pieces that are one part of thinking about wellness. And I know that there's lots of activities going on here on the campus around all of those, especially around EHR usability. Another big chunk is culture. What's the culture I work in, and how does it contribute to my wellness or not? And that's where I'm going to focus quite a bit of attention. And then lastly, what do I do for myself and with myself that helps me? I tend to think of professional fulfillment and the flip side of it, burnout, as very much an organizational responsibility and your own division's responsibility. And things are happening in those regards. People are really starting to pay attention and work on them, which hopefully benefit you and will continue to benefit you down the road. And in the immediate, as an individual, we also have to think about how do we care for ourselves and relieve our own distress while we're waiting for the bigger things to happen, or while we're participating even in the bigger things happening. And that's that chunk. And I'm going to give one suggestion for the new year at the end for that. So let's talk about wellness. And I want to start by asking you it looks like almost everybody's had some coffee. So I want you to think about, what's the best job you ever had? Now, it doesn't have to be the best. If you can't think of the best, what's a job you think fondly of? It can be your current job. I'm not going to ask anybody to state it, so you don't have no disclaimer. You don't have to say this is my best job ever, but it might be this one. It might be a job you had in high school. It can be any of those, okay? And I want you to think about what was it about the job that made it memorable to you or makes it memorable to you, enjoyable to you. Or maybe brings a smile to your face when you think about it from the current or the past. And I want to ask, not for you to share what the job was, but what were the features of it that come to mind when you think about what made or makes that job memorable to you? Anybody want to share? What were some features of that job that made it a job you think, oh, think fondly about that. That was a good time. So you connected to the meaning of it. Thank you. What else? It was fun. What made it fun? What was the third thing? People learning and
People and learning.
okay. So the people I worked with, I got to learn. Can I add a word to that? And grow. Okay. Was connected to meaning for me. What else? Anybody on Zoom wanna unmute?
At the time necessary for the job.
Ah, so you felt like you could do good work. Mhm. Can you speak up for a minute?
Oh, I-
Oh, okay. So there were some boundaries around it, or you had boundaries around it,
A sense of accomplishment.
a sense of accomplishment. Okay. What else? Ah, so you were recognized for what you did in this promotion. And may I use another term? Did it feel fair? Yeah, okay. So what you did felt like it was noticed, rewarded, and fair. Okay. Anybody else? Anything we haven't touched on? I once did this exercise with a group of radiologists, and one of the docs said, best job was in high school. I worked at a golf course and at night, I got to go out with beer and drive around on the golf course in the cart. I was like, huh, how am I going to use that? Exactly how am I going to use that? But now I can use it as a joke. It was so cute. So let's hold on to those and think about them. And I'm going to refer to them as we go along, because much of what you have mentioned already is it wasn't as much about the content of what you did as it was about the culture. So I'm going to ask you to think about workplace culture, and I'm going to use the metaphor of it's what we swim in. It's the water we swim in. And I want to quote David Foster Wallace, the late author. He was giving a commencement address and he was talking about culture and water. And he said, there's two young fish swimming along in the water one morning, and an older fish swims by and passes them and says, good morning, boys, how's the water? And they sort of look at him and swim by. And then once they're past him, one of them says to the other one, what the heck is water? And that is often what workplace culture is like. We are so immersed in it that we may not even be aware of what it is or how it's impacting us. And what I'd like to do in this section is raise our awareness of what is it? What are the pieces of it? And as we're talking, I know in your own division that there are, that you have community, you have camaraderie, you see some of these things. Think about this in your own environment. And I'll give you an opportunity to think about what it is in your opportunity. What's the water you swim in like? And again, you won't have to share this. What's the water you swim in like? Is it like a warm day at the beach? It's fun, people you care about are around, you're doing fun things with people, and it's nice. Is the water you swim in filled with a lot of people? They're busy and hardworking. I don't know if any of you have ever done a triathlon or even I did a mini triathlon. There's like arms that come back and hit you in the head as you're swimming. And essentially, people are working hard, they're competing with themselves and sometimes with each other? Or is the water you swim in like a well-demarcated pool? It's clean, you know your lane, and you're competing with the people that you're in the pool with. I hope your water isn't like this, where you are diligently working along and there's a shark in the water with you. Perhaps your water is this, which is turbulent. And I think turbulent water in healthcare work maybe it connects for many of us. But is your work environment a place where your colleagues, and in this case, these are lifeguards, form a human chain to rescue someone who's struggling in the turbulent water? Is that the environment you work in? Now, of course, I could go on with water metaphors here forever and ever, and maybe your own sense is some combination of these or something completely different. But are we aware of what that water is that we swim in? What does it look like or feel like for us? Let me define workplace culture so we know what we're working from. This is the dictionary definition. It's the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an organization. But I think of it as something a little bit simpler. It's the sum total of what leaders, teams, and individuals say and do day in and day out. So it isn't what we say our culture is, it's what we actually say to each other and do each day. And it's the sum total. That means it's all of us. It's not just the leader. And leaders and some individuals on teams and in groups do have inordinate impact on culture and responsibility to culture. And they are not the only ones. Each of us in our actions and words impacts the culture we work in. And I think about it this way, to continue the water metaphor. When you are with a patient or talking with somebody in the hall or in a meeting, does what you say and do add to the water in this one on the left, which is pristine, warm, clear? Does what you say and do add clarity and warmth to that water? Or does what you say and do perhaps add a little sludge at times to the water, muck it up a bit? Or something in between and different things on different days. So what do we mean by culture? What are the components of it? And the components of workplace culture, this comes from several people's work, but the component pieces of it, and think about this in your own work environment. First is voice or input. Can I use my voice in a psychologically safe way? Meaning in a way where I'm not worried about repercussions or embarrassment from using it? Is my input sought? Does my voice matter? That's a huge part of culture. Is there community, collegiality, support? Samantha said, her best job was fun. And the first thing that she thought of as fun was the people, right? We spend a lot of our time at work and we spend a lot of our time with colleagues. What is that community, collegiality, and support like? Do I feel like people have my back? Do they see me as a person? Is there real appreciation for what I do? Do I feel valued? Now, appreciation and feeling valued are not the exact same thing, but appreciation is one way that we can feel valued. Another way is to have our work recognized and get promoted for it. So another component is, and you mentioned this as well, Samantha, am I in an environment where I'm invested in, where I have the opportunity to learn and grow, where people care about my development and my growth? You're in an academic institution. That's obviously a big part of being in an academic institution. Is there fairness and equity? And the most obvious and concrete form of this is pay, but this goes well beyond pay. Am I promoted? Do promotions happen in an equitable way? Or does it feel kind of opaque and it's hard to know who gets promoted? Do voices get listened to in a fair and equitable way? Or is it certain people's voices that always get heard and others not? And certainly, what's the schedule like? What's the call schedule like? Those can all be issues of fairness and equity as well. Do I have a values alignment and meaning in what I do? Another point that was brought up right away is, workplace culture is about that alignment as well. And then a general term, cultural compassion. Do I work in an environment where we notice each other and we reach out to support and comfort? And then the last two points about culture, I put last not because they're least important, but because every other part of culture is involved with these last two. And one is communication and the other is leadership. And that, as I said earlier, leadership has an inordinate impact and responsibility with culture, and they are not the only ones. We all do as well. So how do we know these things are so important? Maybe they don't matter that much. Maybe it's all about getting the EHR to work and enough staffing, and then everything will be fine. Well, we know that they matter. And what's on the right is a blow up of what's on the left. So you can just focus on the right. We know it matters because Gallup has looked at what impacts people's satisfaction, their engagement, and their performance at work. And what they have found from surveying hundreds of thousands of employees about satisfaction and performance is that there are 12 statements that predict engagement and performance. And I'm not going to read all 12 of them, but at least 10 of them, and I would argue that 11 of them, but at least 10 of them are directly related to cultural factors, not productivity, not money, not workflow, but to workplace culture. I'll highlight 4 of them. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. That's appreciation. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. That's community, collegiality. At work, my opinions seem to matter. That's voice. And then at the bottom, in the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. That's, am I invested in? Am I developed? Do I feel like somebody cares about my growth? And if we went through almost all the rest of them, we would see direct connections of them to all of those pieces of workplace culture that I just mentioned. And so we know that these are really important to our wellness. The water we swim in is really important to our wellness because it determines so much around engagement and performance. And it also, on the flip side, is a predictor of thinking about leaving. So this was just published a few months ago. They surveyed like 35,000 physicians. This is a physician study in 15 academic institutions, 18,000 respondents. So this is 18,000 physicians. And they looked at their intention to leave, and that was a moderate or high intention to leave their job in the next 2 years. The overall percent was 32.6%. That's almost a third of people reported a moderate to high intent to leave. Now, I can tell you from coaching, they won't all leave. Everybody, when they come to coaching, are like, I got to get out of this. And most don't. But the distress connected to it is real and very important. And when they looked at what factors were directly related to an intent to leave, the two that were statistically significant were depression and then a negative impact of their work on their relationships. But when they looked at what was inversely related to an intent to leave, the better this was at work, the less likely you were to leave. It was a supportive leadership, peer support, personal organizational values alignment, gratitude, organization support, and electronic health record helpfulness. So 5 of those 6 are cultural parameters. And so we see that it isn't just that those predict performance, they also drive us in the other direction as well. So a huge reason why people leave is because of culture. Now, often, like I said at the beginning about the water we swim in, often people don't leave and say, I'm leaving because the culture's bad. They say, I'm leaving because, most people say, I'm leaving for a better opportunity because they don't want to burn their bridges. That's understandable. But when you pull them aside, they say, I'm leaving because nobody noticed what I contributed. My voice never seemed to matter in what was going on. I didn't feel like anybody had my back. I didn't have any opportunities to grow or develop, and I want to try new stuff. And so we see those themes of culture over and over again when we really debrief why people leave. So culture is a big driver of what brings us joy in the workplace and also why we choose to go. The other interesting thing, and I see at least one psychologist in the room, another interesting thing is the contagion effect. And this has been shown in healthcare as well, that about a quarter, 22 to 26%, about a quarter of our own individual sense of engagement or burnout is connected to those around me. So it isn't just solely what am I experiencing, but the impact of our environment is part of that for us. And hopefully you have the experience of working in a workplace environment where those around you, you feel that energy, that support to do your work as well. And perhaps some of you have had the experience of working in workplace environments where it wasn't that healthy and you could feel it and it brought you down as well. And that's really what we know about workplace culture. There is this contagion effect. And then I want to talk for a moment about leadership. I referred to this already. These are two studies that were done on two different groups of people. So they were both done at the Mayo Clinic. The first one was a survey of physicians about their physician bosses. And the second was a survey of healthcare workers across every arena in the environment of their bosses. And what they did was they surveyed them about their own experiences of burnout and satisfaction. And then they asked them to rate the leadership qualities of their bosses. And what they found in both studies was that the leadership qualities or the scores of the bosses correlated with burnout and satisfaction to a significant degree. In the physician study, they found that just a 1-point increase in a physician leader's leadership score, and it was a 12 factors that they evaluated the leaders on, just a 1-point increase decreased the likelihood of burnout by 3.3% and increased the likelihood of satisfaction by 9%. And in the same study of healthcare workers across the whole organization, not just physicians, the effect was similar but even greater, which was that there was a 7% decrease in the risk of burnout and an 11% increase in the risk of satisfaction. And the kinds of leadership things they ask people to assess their bosses about, here's some examples on the right: keeping people informed, encouraging people to voice their ideas, having career development conversations, providing feedback, and showing appreciation. I'm feeling a little like a broken record here, feeling these same themes over and over again. So we see that all of these impact us. The workplace environment is hugely important. And the last piece of data I'm going to show you is just to remind us how important community is. I always think of this as my duh slide. Sure, yeah, we know that. We do know that. Many of us know it on a very intuitive level, but I think sometimes we take it for granted, much like the water we swim in. And it's really important that we feel connected to people. This was a study that looked at mortality. So how long we live related to various factors. It was over 300,000 people in Scandinavia that were followed over 7.5 years. And what they found, the second and third bars are about the quality of one's interactions and relationships. And what they found was that there was a huge mortality benefit to having strong connections and strong relationships. And that mortality benefit was actually greater than the benefit of quitting cigarettes, the benefit of quitting alcohol, the benefit of losing weight, the benefit of exercising, which are further down the scale. So those shorter bars are the other ones I referred to. So I show this slide to remind us just how important our interactions with each other are in wellness. And again, since we spend so much of our time at work and with each other, or maybe virtually, but still with people on Zoom, these interactions have a huge impact on us. And let's remind ourselves of the importance of them and not take them for granted. So what do we do about culture? Well, I hope I've suggested that the very first thing in nurturing culture is just to notice it. You know, notice the water you swim in. Is it cold? Is it murky? Is it clear? Is it warm? What is the water? What's the culture I'm in? Let's name it. And then really assess it and invest in it and tend to it, care for the culture. And these are some suggestions, big picture suggestions. One is to, don't worry about fixing it all and starting big, start local. Your clinic site, your team, the people you interact with on a regular basis, and start by identifying and noticing what you are already doing. And I know from knowing some of you in this division, you are already doing a lot of things that build community, that provide voice, that ask for input, that mentor and support each other. Notice them, and not just notice them and say, check, we did that, on to the next thing. What are we not doing right? Notice them and build on it. We do, rather than, yep, good, we got that checked. Now we got to take care of this and this. That's how our brain works all the time. But by capitalizing on what we are doing and using it and taking it even further, we can build culture easier by capitalizing on what we have. Tap into the resources that are available in your division, in your department. I know that you're well connected through Samantha and Devin and Maria with the Weldom, the Department of Medicine's Wellness Committee. They have resources, use them. And then the other thing I would suggest is to start thinking about how are we actively, and I actually know you're starting to do that, you are doing this. How do we want to consciously work on culture? Do we want to make it an item on the agenda at our meetings? Do we want to do some sort of, not really soul searching, but assessment of our culture? Do we want to notice where we are flourishing and where we might want to work on it? So actually making it part of the work of the team, just like how workflow for med refills. How do we work on culture? The first page of that 2-page handout, or the front side of it, the first page for those of you virtually and the front side, are a lot of suggested questions that you can use for discussion and reflection. If you really want to use it as part of a meeting or team efforts to think about where are some places we could start to assess how we're doing and where we are and how we want to move forward. So that's culture. I'm going to have some time for questions. I'd love to stop right now and ask questions, but I fear we would never finish. So I'm going to finish up and then come back to questions. So hold on to those questions. I want to end, especially since it's the new year, with one suggestion or one idea for the new year for yourself. And I want to remind us, when back in 2000, 2005, 2010, we thought of caring for oneself as being resilient. Build your resilience so you can bounce back from adversity better. And to build your resistance, you got to do a lot of self-care. And sometimes that self-care felt like we were flogging ourselves. Here's the checklist. Am I doing enough of it? Am I doing enough sleep? I'm not getting enough sleep. Oh, I got to do that because that's important. Oh, and I got to meditate too. How in the heck am I going to meditate? And mindfulness went from being something you do an hour a day to a mindful moment, because we're trying to fit it in. And could we do it, by taking a deep breath before each patient? Because that's the only way we could fit it in. And so it almost became, even though self-care is wonderful, and I work with people all the time on that, it can feel like another to-do list in the back of our mind. But as we think about well-being 2.0, that Dr. Shanafel was talking about, this idea of fulfillment and life integration, I'm going to suggest that perhaps something we can do for ourselves is to get more clarity for ourselves. Yes, all those other things like exercise and sleep and all those are wonderful and important, and I strongly encourage them. But sometimes to step back and get clarity for ourselves about what we want can be the most helpful. And I want to suggest this book, which just came out this year, written by the psychiatrist Pooja Lakshman, called Real Self-Care. I love the subtitle, which is Crystals, Cleanses, and Bubble Baths Not Included. And that's because her premise is that all those things are nice, but those aren't the things that are life-giving and sustainable through a lifetime. And that really the 4 pillars she talks about in her book that help us day in and day out make choices and advocate for ourselves in ways that are sustainable are to be clear on what your values are, know what your boundaries are and enforce them, have compassion for yourself, and own your own self-agency. I would love to talk about all 4 of those, but time does not allow. All 4 of them are important, but I want to focus in on values. And why values? Some of you in the room have done values work with me. And so what I will say is that I do a lot of values work in my coaching. And I've probably coached over 200 or 300 people over time. And when I say values, most people are kind of like, yeah, I know my values. And I say, well, tell me what your values are. And they're like, kindness. Yep, that's a value of mine. And family. And my point is that for the vast majority of us, we have a sense of our values, but if we were asked in the moment to write them down, most of us would not be able to write them down. And in the, again, hundreds of people I've worked with a handful of people who've said, oh, I've done values work and these are my values. And I will often say, okay, maybe we don't need to spend as much time on that. And they're like, no, I want to do more work on it because it's been so important for me. And so I'm going to suggest that values work can be very helpful for all of us. Why? Whoops, we did some, whoa, what happened? A couple of my slides are missing, so I'll just tell you about them. They're probably at the end. Let's see if they got moved accidentally. Here's the references. Nope. And those are the slides I deleted. So let me talk for a moment about values. Why is it so important to know our values? Because we use them all the time. And for most of us, our values operate on a subconscious or just slightly below the surface level. We have a sense of a gut sense of this is right for me or not, but we often can't articulate, I didn't make this choice because it doesn't align with my values in this way. We will often say, you know, I did the pros and cons, it doesn't quite work for me, or my gut tells me that this just isn't going to work for me. For most of us, our values operate at that level, but we're still using them all the time on the gut level. They drive our decision making. They drive how we interpret experiences. So Samantha and I are in a meeting. We walk out of the first meeting of the year and it's a team building meeting. And it's a whole hour of team building activities. And we walk out and Samantha says, oh, that was great. I think that's really going to help our team in the new year. And I say, that was a waste of time. We got nothing done. It was so inefficient. Why did we do it like that? She's interpreting that meeting through the lens of connectedness and relationship are really important. And I'm interpreting it through efficiency, action. Those are what I value. Neither of us are better or worse than the other. They're both important. They both matter. Values are equal, but we experience things differently because we're interpreting them through the lens of our values and we're not even aware of it most of the time. The other important thing about values is once we can name our values and concretely connect them to what I did today, we are happier. We have more sense of meaning and purpose, and we have more professional fulfillment. And we have less burnout. So an example is I'm driving home. Maybe some of you are biking home from work. I'm going home from work. And instead of thinking of the patient who got really mad at me, I'm thinking, when I took extra time with this person today, that was important to me because connection is so important to me, or being of service. I think I really was of service to this patient today. That feels really good. When we can make that concrete, immediate connection in our day-to-day life to our values, we feel more satisfaction, we have more resilience, and we're happier. So that's the reason why bringing them from the sort of just below the surface to the conscious is really important and helpful for us. And the second page of the handout is an exercise that I use to help people define their values. And it may look somewhat familiar to some of you here. And I'm not going to read through it completely. There's a lot of different ways to name our values and make them concrete. There's no gold standard. And a lot of them are quickie kind of exercises, circle things on a list. And what happens with those is that often people circle aspirational values. I would like to be kind, but is it really a driver of my behavior? And it's great to have aspirational values. I have being kinder as one of my own. And is it a driver of my day-to-day life? I'm not totally sure. And so also, when you do this exercise, it's based on lived experiences, your own lived experiences. And so you can connect that value you name to your own real lived experiences. And at my age, I have a lot of lived experiences to draw on. So that's an exercise to define. Now, why, how do I use it after that, which was another nice slide it's missing here. How do I use it after that? The beauty of it is when I have clarity on values, I can then use it in my decision making. So rather than, I'll make a pros and cons list. A pros and cons list is really a list of your values, but we call them pros and cons. The things that are pros are your values. The cons are things that are out of alignment with your values. But we can start using our values proactively in decision-making. We can also use them to set boundaries. So a lot of times the residents will say to me, one of the topics I want to talk about is learning to say no. I say, that's great. You have to know what drives you and what's important to you, so you know what you want to say no to. You can't just learn skills to say no. You need to have the bigger picture of why I say no. So having values helps using them can, and once they're concrete, we can use them to make decisions. We can use them to set boundaries for ourselves, which they're still going to be hard to do, but it's a great thing to do. But the other beauty of them is we can use them to help us plan and schedule our time. So instead of my time is filled by what everybody else wants or needs from me, I can actively say, this is important to me, and I am going to plan and schedule time around what I value. All right, so that's an end of the year or beginning of the year suggestion. And I'm always happy to do that with people that I've found it to be incredibly meaningful over time. And I see somebody's nodding their head who I know did this, so I appreciate that reinforcement. So I'm going to stop there and say, we've talked a bit about from distress to wellness. We've talked about workplace culture, and now a different take on what one might do for oneself this year. Let me open it up for questions, thoughts, comments. Looks like that slide is present, so. I'm sure it was one of those things where I hit something and they went away this morning. All right. Anybody online who's, anybody virtually want to have any questions? Yes. You want to take that? Comments, questions?
So I worked with Marty in residency, and it was great. And we did values work as a group. And I think it's one of the things that's been most meaningful in how I've chose things throughout my training and careers, which I really appreciate.
Thank you.
How can, as a leader, how can you incorporate values for like a broader group? Like, I think I can understand how to do it on an individual level, but is there ways to incorporate like values as a group or for broader numbers of people than just one-on-one?
So do you mean incorporate it for the individuals in the group or have the team talk about values? Or both?
Both, sure.
I shouldn't have given you the both option there. So I'll start with the easier one first, which is the individuals on the team. So we can start using the language of values. Like, what's important to you? What drove you to do this? I will often, with people, not use the term values. They'll say, oh, this was a great experience. I'll say, what about it made it great for you? Because almost always, if it was a great experience, it was related to you living some important things to you. And so just that opportunity to help somebody, maybe a trainee or somebody who works with you, what about working on this grant was so exciting for you? And helping them name individually, helping them name what the pieces are that light their fire or bring them into the flow can be helpful. As a team, and this gets a little bit cliche in healthcare, like what are our values as a team? And it becomes the patient and quality and whatever. And those are good. I'm not demeaning those at all. But really digging down, what are the pieces that drive us as a team? What are the things that are most important to us? And then the hard part, how do I whittle down that list of 10 things to really make the team get down to 4, 5, or 3? And why? Because, probably all of you that lead and manage know that if you have 15 priorities, you have none, right? If you have 15 values, it's hard to know how to use your values in making a decision. And of course, values will be in conflict, and that's part of values 2.0. We can do another day, but there'll be conflict. But part of that exercise is at the end to have people identify their top 6 if they have a lot. And that is so that you can really focus in on what are we going to say are most important to us. And so that, especially with a team, bringing a team to this point of, if I have to weigh between access and quality, I have to we have to really have a discussion about this. And then once we define them, we start using them as a team. We have said these are our values. How do we use them in deciding this, or in setting up this program, or in the new workflow? So actually applying them, much like you would do individually. How do I start applying this? And reflecting back on it. Just like I was talking about driving home and thinking about what I did in the day and saying, oh, that connects to my value. As a leader, reminding the team, we did this. It was hard. And it was part of what we say we believe is really important, and we did it. And so closing that loop, defining them, using them, and then reminding ourselves we use them. That's how you reinforce them. And you make them truly part of the culture, not just said part of the culture. Because we know that voiced values are not necessarily lived values, especially with teams and organizations. And so how do we actually incorporate them, use them, remind ourselves we use them, and maybe say, we used them well in these ways, we'd like to do better in these ways in the future. Does that get there? I think there's a question back there.
Also a question on the chat, where do humor and laughter fall into this?
Well, there's certainly a therapist I talked to some years ago told me that humor is a higher form of coping. And so I think in workplace culture, I can't say that I'm an expert on humor in workplace culture. I've read a little bit about it, but I can't quote you studies on it. But humor and laughter are really important. And the higher functioning teams generally have some way of being able to relate to each other in a more relaxed and loving and fun way. And humor is often part of them. Like so many things in life, there's a lot of benefits to it, and there are potential traps. And so humor and laughter are hugely important, and we need to really think about the people, the audience. Did everybody experience it in the same way? Now, I'm all for humor and laughter. I think that dry with none of that does not help workplace culture. And we're complex people. We can handle both of these things, both the benefits of it, but also awareness of the traps of it. That answer your question, Madeline?
I wanted to ask, thank you for your presentation. And you talked about the role of clarifying values and how that can bring a team together. Can you also elaborate further on how clarifying values can also help you figure out, where you shouldn't work together as well, just to explain how that process also works? Because I've seen that as a potential outcome from clarifying values as well.
Where you should not work
Yeah,
together?
where you shouldn't work together as well, like where it's actually better to create 2 teams as opposed to necessarily 1 team.
Or even, I was thinking a little bit more of, yes, we care about this, but it isn't one of our top 3 values. And so we have to make the hard choice that we're going to do these and not this. Does that make sense? So this happens all the time, which is good opportunities come our way. Often, many good opportunities come our way that align with our values. And the question becomes, do I have the time and the space to actually do it? So the first question is, does this align with what's important to us as a team or as individuals? But the second is, do I have the time and space for it? And so sometimes we have to make a choice to not act on something. And that's team boundaries as opposed to individual boundaries. But we need to make the decision that, yes, it's a good idea. And if we're going to focus on these things we said we value, we can't also do this right now. Or we can ask somebody else to do it. We'd love to do it. We don't have the time and space for it. And I think that individually happens a lot. I mean, most of you in this room probably experience what a lot of the people I coach experience, which is a lot of good opportunities come your way. And the temptation is to say yes to all of them. And then, of course, I see you as a coach because you've said yes to all of them and you are overwhelmed, right? And that's where values comes in. Yes, this is important to me. I have this other thing that's also important to me. And I have this much time. How do I choose between them? So often it's not that somebody's offering you something that doesn't align with your values, because those are kind of easy to say no to. Often it's they do align, and do we have the bandwidth to do it? And I think that's really comes in for individuals. It certainly comes into play for teams. It's where you start to see 7 pillars for the year, or 15 goals for the year. Like, not going to work. I think we're at time. Thank you very much.
So Kimberly, if you could all, starting with breakfast, just number yourselves. This is how we're gonna do our random round. We use random numbers out here, so. So I'm number 1? Yeah, exactly.